Welcome to Off the Hook. On today's episode, we're talking about all things in comic book art. We visit with Tony Hazard of Cover to Cover to have a look at his print collection. We go to Galaxy Comics to talk about comic book art in the modern age. But first, we're going to visit the studio of an artist right here in Winnipeg.
Hi, my name is Donovan Yasha. I'm a comic book artist and colorist from Winnipeg, Manitoba. I've been in the industry for about 20 years. It really kind of gives there's this bright light. Well, I've been drawing comics my entire life, ever since I was a young kid. Self-published my first book at, I have to do the math here, 10. Photocopied them, handed them out to neighbors, and I'm still publishing that strip today. It's called Space Pig Amadeus. You don't stop. On a more professional level, when I got out of university with a Bachelor of Fine Arts, I went to a local studio here called Digital Chameleon and got to learn under Laverne Kanzierski, who pioneered a lot of digital comic book coloring techniques and whatnot. Yeah, my gosh, that was 20 years ago now. Over my career, I've been really lucky to work for almost every major publisher. Did most of the Superman titles in the late 90s, early 2000s for DC. Some of the Marvel stuff around the same time, Iron Man, a couple Captain America issues, which is great. A couple covers during that run, which was a huge source of pride for me. Also recently, I guess one of the big properties as a Canadian I'm proud to have worked on is Captain Canuck. Captain Canuck came out in the same month I was born, so it's a nice little bit of a bucket list for me. So this is from Captain Canuck number 15. I would get line art. At this point, it's already been through, obviously someone's written the script. An artist, in this case a guy from Toronto named Jason Liu, has done a pencil layout. Once I get that in, I basically go through a process called flatting, where I'll lay in flat colors, basically picking, I'm gonna want an orange background, Captain Canuck's whites are gonna be blue. Basically the darkest colors I'm gonna lay down, I've got them all flat. Essentially I'm making selections and sort of starting to give some shape to that. By the time I'm done that, it's gonna end up looking like this. So, you know, a far cry from that sort of flat look. Here I've added in, he's actually tackling a robot and I think stabbing it in the head. So I've got this blue light, some specular highlights here to indicate that there's a really bright spark light coming out of here. And then having some of that blue light carry on into areas like this. That whole art stage of writing, penciling, inking, coloring, and an editor shepherding it through all those, it can sometimes take quite a while and be a situation where you've got a lot of edits and revisions. Like I just went back and forth on a particular book 2 or 3 times. Everything that you do for bigger properties, sometimes it's not your voice. You got to match it to what they're looking for. Every Superman book published in the late 90s was basically done here in Winnipeg. You know, the cape has to be a certain color. There's all sorts of rules and guidelines. Suit is, you know, YR bow tie for this guy, which is red, YB suit, which is green, and various percentages of the colors in one. You can create comic books for bigger publishers anywhere in the world. Previously, it used to be you'd have to work in New York, it's probably the biggest one, or you'd have to live right next door to a FedEx and spend exorbitant amounts of money shipping artwork and stuff overnight. With the digital age that sort of crept in, we were still using FedEx when I started at Digital Chameleon in the late 90s. Now, everything I do for editors and companies is all through email, Dropbox, FTPs, and you can do it from anywhere. For the size of city, I think Winnipeg's per capita has a tremendous amount of comic book, people involved in the comic book industry. In the mid-70s, Captain Canuck started here. Laverne Kanzierski started the coloring studio and pioneering those digital techniques. So especially for comic book colorists, there's a large number that have, if they don't still live here, they certainly got their start here. And Portage in Maine, based out of Winnipeg here, does a big line of Indigenous themed books and coloring a lot of their work, which is a lot of it's going out to schools and different provinces, and that's one of the more recent book projects I've actually been really proud to have worked on. And It's incredible to me, especially, I mean, I grew up in a small town that very monotone in color, I suppose, like a lot of small towns. As I've become an adult, you open your eyes to a whole bunch of history that you've not been taught in school or maybe had experience with. And working on those books is sort of just an extra spotlight shone on stuff that's important to this country, that, you know, furthering my own education and knowledge about issues that I had no idea existed as a young man. So.
Donovan, thanks for showing us around your studio today. We've really enjoyed everything. It's taught us a lot too.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. We're at the shop today talking about comic book art. My guest today is Tony Hazard from Cover to Cover. He brought down some of his great collection. We're going to be going through it today. How's it going, Tony?
Good, Garth. How are you doing?
Very good, very good. Why don't you start with what you brought us today?
Okay. What I brought a few lithographs that I've had from over the years. If you notice, this one is sort of in a style of almost like a John Romita late 70s kind of style. And there's Adam Hughes doing Red Sonja, which is a kind of a popular one. And then this one here is basically taken after Kirby, and it's by an artist named John Watson, doing the classic Thing versus Hulk FF25 take on that.
Very nice, very nice. Kirby liked to have a little bit of realism in his art too. Alex Ross is another good example. I see you've got some of his stuff here as well.
Yeah, this is an Alex Ross Marvel Universe, basically set classic 70s characters. And yeah, Alex Ross loves to do sort of like a realistic painting. He's got a couple of different models that he uses for the faces and that for the different characters. I've been collecting comics for close to 40 years, and I've been collecting art from about 87 to about 2005.
Can you tell us the difference between a print and a lithograph?
Okay, what a lithograph is just basically it's a cheaper reproduction of the actual print. This was a lithograph that Dynamics Forces had commissioned by Alex Ross about 15 years ago, because I have a bunch that I do have hanging up in my house, and then I still have some that I still have just waiting to be framed, and then I've got over 400 posters too from back in the day when Marvel first started doing posters, and then I've got promo posters, I've got signed art from different people I've met at conferences and conventions, and I've even got some art from local artists. P. Craig Russell did a couple of Doctor Strange one-shots like in Marvel Fanfare. This is just his depiction of Marvel's alien demon, Mephisto.
Funny you mentioned Marvel Fanfare. Actually, never really got a lot of notice, but first to use glossy paper at the time.
Yeah. First
to bring in artists to work on just 2 or 3 specific books in an arc, you know, and then move on to something else. Yeah, Marvel Fanfare. Actually, I really enjoyed it when I was younger. Speaking of changes from the
original,
the 90s,
yeah, when she came out in the
80s,
when she was conceptualized in the late 70s, she was supposed to be called the Disco Dazzler, but Disco died, so they just left it as Dazzler.
And her first appearance was in 130 of Uncanny X-Men.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was more of a disco queen.
Disco queen, and that's what she was originally created for, and then how she evolved by the end of the 80s to look more basically superhero with the same powers. In the late 1980s, there was a studio in New Jersey that had commissioned different artists to do original prints. I was fortunate enough to order quite a few from them back in the day. Like they're all signed and numbered, stamped with a seal, and there's the signature. This is taken after some Jack Kirby art from the 60s, is what he based this cover on. As you can basically the same sort of Kirby, kind of the blocky Kirby style,
Big hands.
but it's still quite detailed for it. And there are some of the artists nowadays that do still try to emulate this style. And this is actually a lovely Doctor Strange conjuring up his girlfriend Clea. And it's by Kevin Nolan. But you just look at just a few little things from Marvel in the mid-'80s. Digital, a lot of times, it doesn't show you the true aspect of what is on the printed page. A printed page can give you so much more, if you're looking at it as an art standpoint, it can give you so much more looking on the printed page than it can on a screen or a tablet. It's like listening to an MP3 as opposed to an album. You know, the MP3, everything's nice, clean, and sounding. When we listen to the album, there's a different feel to it. Some of the more monumental artists are like Will Eisner, who with the Spirits. And then you've got Kirby, Ditko. Then you have, like, later on, Romita, Kurt Swan, George Perez, Brian Boland, Alex Ross, Jim Lee, Mark Silvestri, Rob Liefeld, Will Spertasio, and Todd McFarlane with doing Image. And then basically from there, you have like some of the people who are coming up big now, like J. Scott Campbell, your Adam Hughes, your Jeff Lemire to an extent. Everybody's got like their own little different quirks, but they've all taken something from somebody that's come before. There's Jim Lee's Punisher fighting ninjas. So once again, you see the contrast in the style and the deep backgrounds. What I have here is what's considered a blank variant cover. Now, what these are is that a lot of people are buying them and they're now taking them to conventions and they're getting different artists to do basically commissioned art for them on these covers. So somebody might take the Spider-Man issue and get the artist who's doing the book or a Spider-Man artist to do a picture and have them sign it at the bottom, like, you know, to Mark from John Romita, Excelsior.
On today's episode, we're talking a lot about comic book art. I'm a big fan of artists like John Byrne and Michael Golden, but I don't know that much about the modern comic book artists. So today we're at Galaxy Comics to talk to Justin about comic books in the modern age. So thanks for having us today. How would you tell us about some of your favorite artists of the modern comic book age?
Oh, there's so many to talk about. I just feel that comics nowadays are driven so much by artists and writers alike. They're just like this collaborative, creative teams that make the best stuff. Artists are on the top of their game just based on the history of influence and just working on new techniques to master their craft. They just make the best comics I've ever seen.
Who are some of your favorite comic book artists of late?
Well, Marvel's got David Marquez, a little bit of Olivier Coipel. They use Esad Ribic a lot, and Jim Chung. He's kind of like the launch darling of Marvel. He'll do like an issue or two to start off its title, and then they'll switch to another artist, which I don't really like that they do.
How does that go over, actually? Yeah, you had mentioned that before, that they'll start somebody, and then they'll get everybody sort of hooked, and then they'll switch it off.
Yeah, it's not really a practice that I really condone. I think that it's a good way of taking people out of the context of the story, because comics are such a visual medium. They'll start off with this amazing artist and then kind of go to a different artist that may be amazing in their own other way, but the people that buy the comics were used to that first guy, and then the new art changes, the comic kind of goes in such a different direction that it's harder to follow, and maybe people kind of lose interest.
Do you find that comic book readers today, are they following the story or the art?
I think it's definitely a little bit of both. I mean, everybody has their own interests, right? Whether it be art or writing or the written word. But today, the writers and the artists, they feed off each other so much that they kind of create together. So they create an atmosphere through the words and the pictures. I find that is happening more and more at Image Comics, for example, where some of these top creators have gone over there to do their own creative work instead of just working at the companies that sort of tell them what to do with their characters. They can just do whatever they want. So the writer can write a script, tell the artist how to do it, and then they execute together and they make the best thing that they can.
A lot more freedom in the project.
Yeah, exactly. Image has had some really, really great series coming out. Like Saga is immensely popular. Brian K. Vaughan and Fiona Staples, they work completely together. They take 2-month breaks so that they can keep the creative team intact. Seven to Eternity is another example of a comic that came out where Rick Remender is working hand in hand with Jerome Pena, to create this like visual masterpiece. Nick Dragata and Jonathan Hickman created East to West several years ago, and it's been the same creative team throughout. So they can keep these creative teams together and make such an awesome work of art that I think that the readers are seeing the masterpiece all together. It's not just an artist, it's not just a writer, it's them together.
So what are some of the things you dislike about the modern age?
The way the comics are marketed, I think I dislike. I dislike the way that some artists are used to pimp out a comic, essentially. They'll write or they'll draw like a super nice cover, but you can only get it at a certain location on the internet or something like that, rather than being able to get it through the retail store in mass quantities. It'll be like a 1 in 100 variant of a super nice cover, and it's worth so much money that people aren't able to buy it. But I feel like a lot of the top artists have been taken away, and they're doing these sort of exclusive variants rather than helping sell and market the comics at the retail level.
Yeah, it used to be back in the day, you could see Michael Turner just about anywhere. And then
Yeah.
As it got more popular, it was just in the variants, just in the 25s, just in the 1 in 100s.
Yeah, J. Scott Campbell and Alex Ross are great examples, of those kind of artists that are in such high demand that they'll only be mostly exclusive to certain high-level variants.
So we talked a little bit about Marvel, and we talked a little bit about Image. What are some of your favorite DC artists?
Oh, there's a few, for sure. I really like Jason Fabok. He gets used on some pretty major stuff, like Justice League Darkseid War at the end of New 52. He got put on The Button, which was the Watch Mini Batman Flash series. And then he recently got used on the Swamp Thing one-shot with Tom King. Just an excellent artist. Gary Frank gets used for some pretty major projects. He's almost always with Jeff Johns these days. He did that Batman Earth 1 one-shot hardcover series, and now he's working on Doomsday Clock with Jeff Johns, and that's like a blockbuster. I really, really like Greg Capullo as well. He's kind of gained some notoriety as an artist of late through his Batman run in New 52, and then more recently, Dark Knight's Metal. I think that one took a lot of people by surprise. Like the sales on that series were excellent, and that had a lot to do with the art.
Yeah. So they talk about comic book art jumping off the page.
Yeah.
But literally, in a lot of cases, that's what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. There's toy lines that are named specifically after artists. Like in the New 52 line of Batman series of toys, it was named the Greg Capullo line, essentially. A little while back, they did a Darwin Cook series, and so they've done that a few times. They do it with statues as well. So they have this Batman black and white series of statues that are Batman drawn by all the different artists. And it's not just called Batman black and white from this series, it's Batman by this artist. And that's really cool. I'm sure artists love to see their work get put into like a statue.
Really appreciate you having us here.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
Thanks.
we'll be back with more Off the Hook.
One of the games tiered across the board that has a very unique game mechanic is a game called Shadows over Camelot by Days of Wonder. Shadows over Camelot plays from 3 to 7 people and is a cooperative game. In other words, it's the players against the game. We are set to the world of King Arthur's Round Table. Each of us are playing a knight. In the beginning of the game, he or she receives an identity card which shows if you're playing for the good side or the bad side, in other words, if you're a traitor. After that, the game is very simple at its core. At the beginning of every turn, the game goes first, representing the evil side. It has different options. Most commonly, it draws cards and tries to beat us in the different quests that we can go to in order to receive bonuses. After that, it's every knight's turn. The knight as well has different options that he or she can choose. The most common one is to either go on a quest, trying to defeat evil and get bonuses, or play a card onto those quests, trying to collect different sets or different conditions of winning the quest. If evil wins the quests, it gets different kind of bonuses, most commonly black swords. If white wins the quest, it also gets swords, most commonly white swords, or other kind of bonuses good for the good side. The game has different victory conditions. One of the most common victory conditions is that all the slots of the swords in King Arthur's table are full. If the majority of the swords are white, the good side wins. If the majority of the swords are black, the bad side wins, including the traitor. Because we never know who the traitor is, this game also creates a lot of suspicion and backstabbing. It's a wonderful game with a very interesting experience. So come on down and check it out here at Across the Board.
Today we're going to be working on some zombicide figures. We're going to show you how to line paint them. Gotta excuse my voice. I've recently lost it, taken a little bit to get it back, so excuse the grittiness. Zombicide's a great miniature game. Comes with a lot of great stuff. The figures come unpainted. There's no, they come with a fair bit of detail, but no actual paint. In order to make the game a little more interesting, we're gonna show you how to paint 3 or 4 at a time, and you can get the whole horde of zombies done fairly quickly. So to get started, I'm gonna get my tools out. I use a few different brushes for this. I like a good small brush, not too small. It doesn't need to be that small. All the points are the same when you're trying to do detail work. So in order to make these guys easier to paint, we prime them first with a good black coat. This way the paint that we use, the acrylics, will stick a lot better. So I went ahead and did these guys ahead of time. So we'll move these aside. And once again, all I'm trying to do is I'm using the same colors on each figure. I'm just mixing them up a little bit. So, you know, but the one base coat that I'm using is this Death Guard green. It's a good zombie color for starting out. You can literally just pour out a little glop of it. There it comes. I'm going to be using a fair bit. Paint's gotten a little thick too, so I'm going to add a little water to it. And by water, I'm just going to add a little bit off the end of my brush and mix it in there. Because the next lesson I'm going to teach you is it's okay to put your brush in your mouth. When you take your paint, just go about halfway up the bristle. Try not to get too much paint up into the top where the bristles meet the brush, or where the bristles meet the top of the brush. That's when your brushes get ruined. That's when they start to splay out, and things like that. So take off the little extra, and all you have to do now is start painting all of the areas that would be fleshy. So it's just its face. You don't worry about if you're messy, because you'll just fix it up again on the next coat. The colors you want to use for the flesh tones are totally up to you. Freshly dead, long dead, wild dead, that kind of thing. That's totally up to you. We'll choose a nice kind of yellow for the next batch, which is actually this yellow that I used here. And same thing, I'm just going to take a drop off of the top of the bottle. Just work from the back of my hands and take this guy and say, you need a yellow tunic. Board games have kind of evolved in the last little while to include more miniatures. They've gotten away from, you know, Monopoly's car or thimble or candlestick, and have sort of evolved into all of this. You know, this is your car, this is your thimble. It's just a way to liven up the game, give the game a new depth. I've been building and painting a long time. So for me, when I see miniatures like this on a table, they're game pieces that almost, you know, scream out, I need to be painted. We're going to add some color. We're going to go with a light blue. Go back to my figure and like it's half blue. Sometimes if the paint isn't coating, if you can still see the black, through. You might need to add a second coat. With this blue, we're going to need to add a second coat. Paint like this will dry very quickly. It will, if you're line painting like this through, 4 or 5 guys, very good chance your first guy is going to be dry by the time you finish your last guy. So now I'm going to just add a little bit of gray to this one's hair here. Gray is a good color because it picks up whatever wash you're going to add to it later. So there you go, now we have an elderly woman with gray hair. In fact, I like that gray so much, I'm going to go back and I'm going to do it over top of this guy's head too. Make me the old couple at the festival. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and I'm going to add a bit of a second coat to the yellow to lighten it up. I'll cover a small spot here where got a little blue from the hood. You can really do as much work on the detail on these models as you want to. There isn't a lot of detail in the models, so when you're trying to put detail into the models, you're creating more work for yourself. Our next step to get our minis prepped is to apply the shades. This is the Citadel Agrathur shade. We really call this talent in a pot. This will do most of the work for you when you're painting your miniatures. First thing I like to do is just to get a surface ready. I like to use an old game mat. These things actually work really well for kids use them for the card games and stuff like that. I like them because the material on the top is very absorbent and it will soak in any excess wash or water or anything like that. And it's neoprene on the bottom, so it doesn't soak through whatever you're working on. So I'll bring out my minis here, give this a good shake, grab a large brush, and you can literally just, this is the slop and goop. We've slopped our paint on, and now we are literally going to take a big drop of this stuff off the end of your brush. Big drop, you don't worry about using too much, and just apply it all over the mini. I like to brush against any detail. It helps to leave the wash behind when you're painting. So when you're brushing it against the texture of the model, like when you get to this spot here where the paint is changed, it will help define the area between them when you add it like that. And it also it'll help to cover up any little mistakes you might have made when you were first applying the paint. This step shouldn't take too long to dry, but it will take longer than the paint to dry. So I'm going to leave these guys to do their thing and dry, and we'll get back to them in a few minutes. For our last step, all we have to do is add some basing material. So to do that, we're going to use some of the Citadel textures. This stuff is really good. It goes on like chunky peanut butter. It's paint that just has a little bit of grit to it. And it's what will give us this sandy, dirty look that's on these bases. So for that, I use a tool like this. You could also use like a coffee stir stick. Actually would work pretty well. This stuff is really thick. All you got to do is just take a big glob of it off like that and start working it onto your figure. It's okay if it gets up onto his feet. It can look like mud. It's all right. And then I just like to smooth it out a bit. So there you have it. We managed to go from completely unpainted to completely painted in little time, and it's a great way to make your game a little more interesting.